Hello students. Today's online lecture is on the topic Physiology of Digestion and Absorption. Till now you have understood the physiological aspects of various organs of the gastrointestinal system. In this lecture you will learn in depth about the physiology of digestion and absorption of various nutrients present in food that occurs at different levels of the gastrointestinal tract. So let us first see the topics that will be covered in this lecture. Today's lecture will cover the topics of digestion and absorption of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and vitamins and minerals. The knowledge of food and nutrition has a direct bearing on the maintenance of sound health of an individual. Similarly, consumption of an adequate diet is very crucial to the human body for maintenance of basal metabolism. Thus, it is important to understand what is a balanced diet before understanding the physiology of nutrition. A balanced diet is a diet which contains different types of food in such quantities and proportions that the need for energy, proteins, fat, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals is adequately met for maintaining health. As you can see in this picture on the right side, a balanced diet must include around 25 to 30% of proteins, 10 to 15% of fats, and 50 to 60% of fiber-rich carbohydrates that should come from grains, vegetables, and fruits. A diet deficient in any of these nutrients will result in malnutrition and growth retardation. Now let us see what are the constituents of a normal diet. A normal diet constitutes of proteins, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, dietary fibers, and water. Most of the food contain all these constituents, but in varying proportions. Proteins are complex organic nitrogenous compounds, and humans can get protein in diet by consumption of dairy products like milk, cheese, etc., eggs, meat, fish, nuts, and beans. Fats are composed of fatty acids and are concentrated sources of energy. The fat requirements can be met by the consumption of food items like ghee, butter, fish oils, plant-based oils like coconut oil, groundnut oil, olive oil, mustard oil, etc. Carbohydrates form the bulk of the diet and are the chief sources of energy. The sources of carbohydrates are cereals like wheat, barley, rice, millets, etc., roots and tuberous vegetables like potato, sweet potato, yam, etc. Vitamins are complex chemical organic substances of high biological activity, and minerals serve specific functions in the body. Both vitamins and minerals are required in small amounts but are very much important for the normal metabolism as they act as catalysts in many reactions. Good dietary sources of vitamins and minerals are fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. The dietary fibers are pectin, cellulose, lignin, etc., and are found in vegetables, fruits, and grains. They absorb water and increases the bulk of the intestinal contents and prevents constipation and colonic cancers. They also help in preventing serious diseases like diabetes, gallbladder stones, and heart diseases. And last but not the least, water. Water acts as the medium in which most of the chemical activities in the body take place. Water occurs in all natural food sources. Most of it comes from that we drink. Now let us see first how digestion and absorption of carbohydrates occur in human beings. The dietary intake of carbohydrates is 250 to 850 grams per day, which represents 50 to 60% of the diet. Major carbohydrates in human diet are present as polysaccharides, oligosaccharides, and monosaccharides. Polysaccharides may be present in various forms. It may be present in the form of starch, which is a plant origin carbohydrate, as glycogen, which is an animal origin form of carbohydrate, or as cellulose, which is again a plant origin carbohydrate and is present in diet in a large amount. In humans, digestion of cellulose does not take place as humans lack the required enzymes for it. Oligosaccharides, based on the number of monosaccharide units present in them, can be classified as disaccharides, trisaccharides, tetrasaccharides, and pentasaccharides. Examples for disaccharides are sucrose, which is made up of glucose and fructose, or lactose, which is made up of glucose and galactose. Monosaccharides present in human diets are most commonly hexoses, like glucose, which is found in fruits, honey, and vegetables, and fructose, found in fruits. Other carbohydrates that may be present in the human diet are lactic acid, pyruvic acid, alcohol, pectin, etc. The digestion of carbohydrates begins in the mouth by the enzyme alpha amylase, or also called as ptyalin, and continues in the stomach and mainly in the small intestine. The alpha amylase present in the saliva can digest only cooked starch to maltose, thus the role of salivary amylase in the digestion of carbohydrates is limited. In the stomach, there occurs minimal digestion of carbohydrates, and it is also due to the action of enzyme alpha amylase that enters the stomach along with the food. The action of ptyalin continues in the stomach for about 20 to 30 minutes till the highly acidic gastric juice mixes with the food and makes it inactive. In the small intestine, the carbohydrates are digested by the action of enzymes pancreatic alpha amylase and enzymes of the brush border epithelium cells of small intestine. The pancreatic alpha amylase present in the pancreatic juice acts on the boiled as well as unboiled starch and variety of other carbohydrates except cellulose, and within 15 to 30 minutes hydrolyzes almost all the starches. Pancreatic alpha amylase acts in an alkaline medium and its digestive activity is increased by the presence of bile salts. The pancreatic alpha amylase converts the polysaccharides, for example starch and glycogen, into oligosaccharides such as maltose and dextrin. The second small intestinal enzymes that participates in the carbohydrate digestion are the brush border enzymes of small intestine. The carbohydrate splitting brush border enzymes of small intestine includes dextrinase, maltase, sucrase, and lactase. These brush border enzymes digest the oligosaccharides into monosaccharides on the surface of the epithelial cells of the villi. For example, alpha-limiting dextrinase enzyme breaks down dextrin into glucose, or the enzyme maltase converts maltose, which is an oligosaccharide, into glucose. Similarly, there are many brush border enzymes. The end products of carbohydrates are monosaccharides like glucose, pentoses, and galactose. The carbohydrate digestion is completed in the jejunal and proximal ileal part of the small intestine, and the end products are absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract, especially in the form of monosaccharides. The site of absorption of the digested carbohydrates are mucosal surface of the jejunum and upper ileum. As for the mechanism of absorption, the various monosaccharides are absorbed by various mechanisms. For example, glucose and galactose are absorbed by a common sodium-dependent active transport system, whereas fructose and pentoses are absorbed by facilitated diffusion and simple diffusion respectively. This diagram shows the mechanism of glucose absorption across the small intestinal epithelium. In the first step of glucose absorption, glucose binds with a carrier protein named as sodium dependent glucose transporter 1 or SGLT1 and forms a glucose carrier complex. This glucose carrier complex moves across the lipid barrier of the cell membrane of the enterocyte and releases glucose inside the cell. This carrier protein is common for both sodium and glucose, thus it is named as sodium dependent glucose transporter. This step of entry of sodium and glucose inside the enterocyte occurs by simple diffusion and does not need any energy. In the second step of glucose absorption, glucose, which is already inside the enterocyte, is further transported into the interstitial space and then ultimately into the blood capillaries by another transporter protein known as glucose transporter 2 or GLUT2, which is a coupled protein with sodium potassium ATPase pump that is present on the basal surface of the enterocyte. This step requires energy, which is supplied by the sodium potassium ATPase pump, and that actively transports the sodium ions out of the cell into the interstitial space. Since there is no regulation for the absorption of monosaccharides into the enterocytes, therefore small intestine can absorb over 5 kg of sucrose per day when available. That is why sometimes even in healthy persons, glucose can appear in urine after consumption of a high carbohydrate diet, and this condition is called as elementary glycosuria. The absorbed glucose is mostly catabolized by the body tissues to produce energy. 30 to 40% of it is converted into fats and stored in the fat cells, and 5% is stored in liver and in muscles as glycogen. Now let us see how the digestion and absorption of proteins occur in human body. The proteins that are digested and absorbed in the gastrointestinal tract come from two sources, exogenous and endogenous. The exogenous or the dietary protein requirements for adults is 0.5 to 0.7 gram per kg of body weight, and for children of the age group 1 to 3 years is 4 gram per kg of body weight. The sources of dietary or exogenous proteins with high biological value are meat, fish, eggs, cheese, and other milk products. Soybean, wheat, and pulses are also rich source of dietary proteins. Now, endogenous proteins are the proteins which reach the intestine through various gastrointestinal secretions, and those which are present in the desquamated epithelial cells of the gut. Proteins are digested by the proteolytic enzymes to amino acids and small polypeptides before they are absorbed. You already know that digestion of proteins does not take place in mouth as there are no proteolytic enzymes present in the saliva. Thus, digestion of proteins begins in the stomach and is completed in the small intestine. So first we will see how proteins are digested in the stomach. In stomach, the enzyme pepsinogen secreted by the chief cells of the main gastric glands, which is converted into active enzyme pepsin, is responsible for digesting about 10 to 15% of proteins that we eat. Pepsinogen is converted into pepsin by the gastric acid hydrochloric acid. This pepsin splits proteins into proteases, peptones, and polypeptides. It is very important for proteolysis to occur in the stomach that the pH of the stomach must be optimum, that is 2. Now, in the small intestine, the proteolytic enzymes of pancreas or the pancreatic proteases play a major role in protein digestion. The interesting thing is that these pancreatic proteases can digest all the proteins present in the chyme even if pepsin is not produced by the stomach cells. The pancreatic proteases breaks the proteins into dipeptides, tripeptides, and small polypeptides, which are further digested by the brush border peptidases. In this flowchart, you can see how proteins that were first present in the stomach were broken down into proteases, peptones, and large polypeptides by the gastric enzyme pepsin. Then these products of protein breakdown, when reach the small intestine, are again broken down into dipeptides, tripeptides, and polypeptides by the pancreatic proteases. Now further, what happens in some of the dipeptides and tripeptides are absorbed directly into the epithelial cells of the small intestine and are further digested by the intracellular peptidases into amino acids. And the remaining dipeptides, tripeptides, and polypeptides are digested in the lumen of the small intestine by the brush border peptidases like aminopeptidases, nucleases, tripeptidases into small polypeptide or amino acids. Now let us see how the digested proteins are absorbed into the body. The end products of protein digestion, that is amino acids, di and tripeptides, are absorbed through the luminal membranes of the epithelial cells of the small intestine. There are three mechanisms of absorption known for this. They are by sodium dependent active transport, by simple diffusion, and by endocytosis. First is the mechanism of sodium-dependent active transport of final products of the protein breakdown. The levoamino acids di and tripeptidases are absorbed by the sodium-dependent active transport. There are separate carriers or transporter proteins present for the absorption of acidic, basic, and neutral amino acids. The steps of active transport mechanism are similar to the glucose absorption. That is, first there occurs binding of amino acids and sodium ions with the carrier protein. Then there is a formation of an electrochemical gradient across the epithelial cell due to the binding. And finally, the sodium and amino acids along with the carrier protein moves inside the cell along the electrochemical gradient. Second mechanism is by simple diffusion. The dextroamino acids are absorbed passively into the epithelial cells by simple diffusion. The third mechanism of absorption of proteins is by endocytosis. Small amounts of large polypeptides are absorbed by this mechanism. Proteins absorbed by endocytosis usually excite immunological or allergic reactions. For example, in newborns, immunoglobulins present in the colostrum are absorbed in the intestinal cells by endocytosis and provides passive immunity to the child. From the inside of the epithelial cells, the absorbed amino acids are transported into the interstitial space across the basolateral membrane by facilitated or simple diffusion. From the interstitium, amino acids enter the capillaries of the villus and then via portal vein they reach the liver and ultimately the general circulation. Now let us try to understand the digestion and absorption of fats in the human body. Dietary fats can be divided into three types: simple fats or neutral fats like triglycerides and cholesterol, compound fats like phospholipids, and associated fats like steroids and fat-soluble vitamins. Dietary fat is of both vegetable and animal origin. Mostly it is in the form of neutral fats or triglycerides. It also includes small amounts of phospholipids, cholesterol, some free fatty acid, and lecithin. The daily intake of fats in the diet widely varies from about 25 grams to 160 grams. The site for fat digestion is the small intestine. Although lipolytic enzyme lingual lipase is secreted in the mouth and gastric lipase is secreted in the stomach, but their action is insignificant. Under normal conditions, gastric lipase is soon inactivated by the gastric juice. Some fat digestion in stomach may occur when the person is suffering from achlorhydria, that is, unable to produce gastric acid, and when there is regurgitation of pancreatic lipase from the duodenum into the stomach. Now, the mechanism of digestion of fats includes the three steps. First is emulsification of fat by bile salts. Second step is hydrolysis of fat droplets by pancreatic and intestinal lipolytic enzymes. And third step is acceleration of fat digestion by micelle formation. Emulsification means breaking of large fat drops into smaller droplets. Emulsification is a prerequisite for action of pancreatic lipase. That is, the pancreatic enzymes cannot digest fat if they are not broken into fine droplets. This is because the pancreatic lipase is water soluble, and due to this nature it can act only on the oil-water interface of fat, and the surface area available for the action of lipase is increased by many folds by the process of emulsification. How emulsification of fat is done by the bile salts? It is done by bile salts because bile salts have a detergent-like action that can lower the surface tension of the fat particles. With lowered surface tension of the fats, the segmentation movements of the small intestine can easily break the large fat globules into fine droplets. Also, bile contains lecithin, which has a stabilization action on the emulsions, and thus this also greatly enhances the emulsifying action of the bile salts. The bile salts surround the fine fat droplets in such a way that their lipophilic, that is the fat loving ends, are towards the fat, and their hydrophilic, that is the water loving ends, are towards the water phase. This easily separates the fat droplets from the aqueous phase. In this diagram you can see the neutral fat particle, and these are the emulsified fat droplets that are surrounded by the typical arrangements of the bile salts. The next process in the mechanism of digestion of fats is hydrolysis of fat droplets by pancreatic and intestinal enzymes. Pancreatic juice is highly alkaline with a pH of 7.8 to 8.4. When it mixes with the acidic chyme coming from the stomach, the pH of the chyme is adjusted to around 7, which is optimal pH for the action of pancreatic lipids. The pancreatic juice contains three types of lipolytic enzymes, namely pancreatic lipase, cholesterol ester hydrolase, and phospholipase A2. The pancreatic lipase, which is a very powerful lipolytic enzyme, digests fat rapidly after emulsification. How it happens? It happens due to the protein colipase that is also found in pancreatic juice. Colipase displaces the bile salts from the fat droplet and allows the action of lipase on it. The pancreatic lipase hydrolyzes almost all the triglycerides of food into two fatty acids and two monoglycerides. Also, cholesterol ester hydrolase, which is activated by the bile salts, converts dietary cholesterol esters into cholesterol and fatty acid. The third process of mechanism of fat digestion is acceleration of fat digestion by formation of micelles. Micelles are basically small water-soluble cylindrical disc-shaped particles. Each micelle is composed of a central fat globule surrounded by about 30 molecules of bile salts. Micelles help in easy absorption of digested fats by forming mixed micelles. See here. The diagram A shows the structure of a mixed micelle. Mixed micelles are formed when monoglycerides and fatty acids released from digestion of fats are incorporated into the central portion of a micelle. In diagram B, you can appreciate the two ends of a bile salt molecule. The hydrophilic or the water-loving part forms the outer covering of the micelle, while the lipophilic or the fat-loving part points towards the center of the micelle. Most of the fat absorption occurs in the duodenum, and almost all the digested lipids are totally absorbed by the time the chyme reaches the jejunum. Absorption of fats is accomplished by following steps. The first step is transportation as micelles to the brush border membrane. The second step is diffusion of lipids across the enterocyte cell membrane. The third step is transport of lipids from inside enterocytes to the interstitial space, and the fourth step in the absorption of fat is transport of lipids into the circulation. This diagram will give you a good understanding about how fats are absorbed into the enterocytes and released into the blood capillaries. In the first step, the micelles that are already formed, they act as a transport vehicle for the products of fat digestion. They bring the hydrolyzed fats in contact with the brush border membrane of the epithelial cells. Now, in the second step of fat absorption, the passive diffusion of the contents of the micelles into the enterocytes takes place. That is, the monoglycerides, free fatty acid, cholesterol, etc. passes inside the epithelial cells by passive diffusion, and the remaining product of micelle, that is the bile salts, are absorbed by the terminal ileum of the mucosa of the small intestine. Now, in the third step, the products of fat digestion enters the interstitium either directly by diffusing across the basal border of the enterocyte or by forming chylomicrons inside the cells first and then releasing by the process of exocytosis. Finally, in the fourth step, the chylomicrons or the short chain fatty acids diffuses further into the lymphatics and blood circulation via the interstitial space. The next topic is absorption of vitamins and minerals. Here in this lecture, I will discuss about the absorption of very few important vitamins and minerals only. The first very important mineral for human beings is iron. Iron absorption occurs mainly in the duodenum and upper jejunum. Normally, about 10% of the 15 to 20 milligram iron is ingested each day is actually absorbed in a healthy male. That means if a healthy person consumes 50 to 20 milligram of iron in a day, only 10% of that is absorbed by the body. Food sources rich in iron are meat, poultry, seafood, beans, dark leafy vegetables, dried fruits, etc. The mechanism of iron absorption can be described under three headings: transport of iron across the brush border of enterocyte, fate of iron in the enterocyte, and transport of iron in the plasma. In the diet, iron may be present as heme or non-heme form. Heme form of iron comes from non-vegetarian food sources. The heme and non-heme forms of iron are absorbed differently by the enterocytes. Heme iron is transported inside the enterocyte across the brush border membrane by a protein called as heme transport protein. And once inside the cell, the ferrous form of the iron is released from the heme by the action of an enzyme called as hemoxygenase. While the non-heme form of iron is present in ferric form in nature. Thus, first the stomach HCl converts the ferric form of iron into ferrous form, and then this iron is transported across the brush border membrane by a protein called as iron transport protein. Once the iron is inside the cytosol of the enterocyte, the free ferrous iron has got two fates. A part of the ferrous iron, depending upon the body's requirement, is actively transported across the basolateral membrane of the enterocytes into the interstitium, and from where it reaches the blood circulation. Whereas the rest of the ferrous iron is oxidized to form ferric form, and it is bound, this ferric form of iron is bound to a protein known as apoferritin to form ferritin. It is difficult to release iron from ferritin form, and thus it stays inside the enterocytes until the cell is sloughed off at the top of the villus. Normally, the iron absorbed into the blood binds with a beta globulin called as apotransferrin to form transferrin. Transferrin is transported in this form in the plasma to be released whenever required by the body. Deficiency of iron in humans will result in iron deficiency anemia. Also, the iron excess in the body will result in a medical condition called as hemochromatosis. You already know about iron deficiency anemia, so in this lecture I will discuss only about hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis is the excess of iron in the body that results in accumulation of hemosiderin in the tissues, producing a condition called as hemosiderosis. Hemochromatosis is characterized by the presence of pigmentation of skin, diabetes due to the damage of the pancreas, cirrhosis and cancer of the liver, and atrophy of the gonads. Now, the next mineral is calcium. Calcium is the most abundant among the minerals in the body. The total content of calcium in an adult man is about 1 to 1.5 kgs, of which around 99% is present in the bones and teeth. Only a small amount, that is 10% of the total calcium found outside the skeletal tissue, performs a wide variety of functions. Best sources of dietary calcium are milk and milk products. Good sources of calcium are beans, leafy vegetables, fish, cabbage, and egg yolk. The dietary requirements of calcium for infants below 1 year old age is 300 to 500 milligram per day. For children between the age group 1 to 18 years is 800 to 1200 milligram per day, and for adult male and female it is around 800 milligrams of calcium per day. Women during pregnancy, lactation and postmenopausal period require about 1500 milligram per day of calcium in their diet. The site of absorption for most of the ingested calcium is the upper small intestine, that is duodenum and jejunum. Normally, about 75 to 80% of the daily intake of calcium, that is about 1000 milligram of calcium, is absorbed from the upper small intestine. Most of the calcium is absorbed by an active transport mechanism. Now, regulation of calcium absorption. Calcium absorption from the small intestine is well regulated to maintain the plasma calcium levels within a narrow range of 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. Vitamin D and parathyroid hormone play a major role in the regulation of calcium absorption. The details of vitamin D and parathyroid hormone will be covered in different lectures. Next is the absorption of vitamins. Vitamins can be classified as two types, mainly fat-soluble vitamins and water-soluble vitamins. Fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, D, E and K become part of micelle formed by the bile salts and are absorbed along with other lipids in the upper part of the small intestine. The absorption of fat-soluble vitamins is deficient if fat absorption is depressed because of the lack of pancreatic enzymes or if bile is excluded from the intestine due to obstruction of the bile duct. Absorption of water-soluble vitamins like vitamin C and B complex vitamins is rapid as compared to fat-soluble vitamins. Most vitamins are absorbed in the upper part of the small intestine except vitamin B12, which is absorbed in the lower part of the small intestine, that is ileum. Most water-soluble vitamins, example vitamin C and the vitamin B group of vitamins like biotin, folic acid, nicotinic acid, pyridoxine, riboflavin and thiamine, are absorbed by facilitated transport or by a sodium-dependent active transport system in the proximal small intestine. Vitamin B12 absorption is more complex than other water-soluble vitamins and needs separate description. The absorption of vitamin B12 involves following steps. In the stomach, first the vitamin B12 is exposed to a specific binding protein R and vitamin B12 binding protein called as intrinsic factor. As the affinity of R protein for vitamin B12 is much more than that of intrinsic factor, most of the vitamin B12 gets bound to the R protein in the stomach. In second step that occurs in the lumen of the small intestine, the pancreatic proteases cleave the vitamin B12 from the R protein and then this unbound vitamin B12 binds to the intrinsic factor and forms intrinsic factor B12 complex. In the third step that occurs in the brush border of enterocyte, the intrinsic factor B12 complex binds to the specific receptors present on the brush border epithelium. After this binding, vitamin B12 is transported into the cytosol of the enterocytes by the process of endocytosis, leaving behind the intrinsic factor at the brush border epithelium. In the next step, vitamin B12 enters the portal circulation from the basolateral border of the enterocyte after binding with a plasma globulin called as transcobalamin 2. Finally, in the liver, vitamin B12 is stored in large amounts after it binds with another globulin called as transcobalamin 2. Liver may store up to 3 years of supply of vitamin B12 and whenever required, this stored vitamin B12 can be transported from the liver to the bone marrow for utilization. With this slide, today's online lecture is over and also all chapters and topics from the unit gastrointestinal system is covered. Thank you.